Ira, maybe a natural place to start, following our conversation is going to be, how did you get interested in the whole startup world? Like, well, how was this a calling for you?
Yeah, so it's a bit of a journey, right? I think that a lot of people's journeys are a bit simplified, so you can tell them on podcasts and stories like this. But the cool thing is when you peer into anyone's story, you find layers. It's like a snowflake. There's fractals to it. Um, my journey kind of didn't begin in tech at all. It actually began in film and in the arts. Coming out of high school, I was super interested in film, and I was super interested in the technical side of it as well. I wanted to be a cinematographer, so I was interested in how cameras behaved and how they moved and how lights affected how people looked. And I was going to go to university to study that. Right, I had been working on film sets and stuff like that, but in one summer before university, kind of me and my good friend Yaniv, who's currently our CTO, we were going through the industry quite hard and I really tried to make the most out of it, meet the most people, and what we found was it wasn't quite for us. We didn't like the direction the industry was trending to at that time. And we didn't want to spend the rest of our lives making Avengers 7. We were more interested in the meaty kind of films, like the Kubricks of the world, the Martin Scorsese's of the world. But we were seeing those films being made less and less, and more of the Transformers 8 and whatnot. So we were kind of looking to pivot away from that world. And so, at that summer, we thought, well, how about we start a little advertising shop? We can, go up to innovative companies and companies that, like are making cool stuff and make ads for them, but make them in a really like interesting manner, like 60-second films, basically. Um, Not your local, like, hey, buy Spence Diamonds at 103.5. No, like we really want to make like, like tell a story arc in 60 seconds and really do something cinematic. And while we were doing that, that was its own process of starting a company, right? And we slowly started to kind of dip our toes into tech after that, because when you start, Googling stuff about like how to run a company, eventually some stuff comes up, and then eventually a Y Combinator video comes up, right? Or like a startup school article. And then you hear about Elon Musk. This is like, like years ago, 6, 7 years ago, he's not as famous. And then you see he has a biography, so you read his book, and then all of a sudden this kind of industry of technology, this industry of software and hardware and innovating at a real pure level, that becomes really fascinating to us. And we're like, okay, well, film and art is beautiful and is something that we're really interested in, but this industry, this seems like we can really have a huge impact. And kind of me and Yaniv's North Star at the time, and still is now, is like, what is the thing that we can do with our time and our short lifespans that will have the most impact, right? We'll be able to change the most amount of people's lives for positive behavior, because that's what we're interested in. Money is not a huge driver to us. Wealth is not a huge driver to us. But being able to accumulate enough resources to do cool shit and change the world, that's interesting to us. And so that's kind of how we slowly started getting into the tech industry. I know it's a convoluted story. I know, it's not very conventional, but that's kind of how we dipped our toes in.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. Right, it's always this quiggly path to get to where you're going. You brought up arts and film, so I have to go back there for 1 second. I'd love to pick your brain on the whole controversy of Scorsese and his comments on the Marvel universe, right? So it's like on the one hand, you have Marvel exploding, like minting money. On the other hand, artists like Scorsese saying, "Hey, this is like kind of like it's an amusement park. It's not really art." So curious as to what are your thoughts on the.
Okay, look, I think one thing that you have to hold in mind is that anytime you're doing a thing for a very long time, you have a conflict of interest. You know, I love cinema. I love going to a movie theater, it being dark, and for 2 hours escaping. But the new generation, right, like Gen Z, wants less and less of that. It seems like, right, and it seems like they're more interested in like shorter YouTube clips and shorter, like TV shows are coming back in vogue in a big time over the last few years because they're more bite sized and can fit them in your life more easily. And so I always have to be cognizant of the fact that like if I'm really like cinema, 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 I might be like the old man on his lawn telling the kids to get off his lawn. You know what I mean? And that's a bit how Scorsese sounds like in that. Like I love Scorsese, I respect him, but he comes off a bit as like dismissing the next generation's wants. Like, life is pretty stressful, man. People got a lot going for them, and this new generation, we're working really freaking hard, right? Like, they're, it's a lot more difficult to get ahead now because there's so much more competition. People are working all the time, sometimes you just want to go home and watch Avengers 7, man. Sometimes you just want to see something explode for like 2 hours, you know? And at the same time, like, I was, a couple of years back, I was kind of like depressed by all of this because I'm like, oh man, is this what everything is turning into? Is there no space for beauty and art and really exploring intricacies? And then films like Parasite started coming out. Have you watched Parasite?
Yes, I have. Yeah, it's a great movie.
Dude, it's a Korean film with English subtitles that came across the North American market, which was kind of like, it was a heady film. It was not a escape your life and go watch explosions, and it killed. Everyone loved it. All of my friends went to see it. Younger people saw it, and so that gave me some hope. I'm like, oh, it's about balance. We can embrace both of them. We can embrace the roller coaster, the Transformers 7, and hopefully we can make space for the parasites of the world. You know?
Yeah, yeah, I think you bring up a good point. There's no more normative view of the world, right? Like the internet has caused this incredible and beautiful mess, right? Where you can basically, like a South Korean song like called Gangnam Style can be listened to like 18 billion times. But like this is unimaginable like when I was young, right? Like that's like everyone would know the lyrics to like a Korean song, but that's the beauty of like the internet basically making it available. And with the good comes the bad, and I think it's like, yeah, it's challenged people's worldviews a little bit. But so I align with that with you. What I'll do maybe offline, I'm gonna definitely pick your brain on movie recommendations. I need less adventures in my life, I find. But I
I
do.
might be bad, working on Fluent, getting an early stage start off the ground. I haven't had time for too many movies,
I can
unfortunately.
imagine. Yeah,
So
running
maybe I might have to ask you for some recommendations.
it. um, I do want to talk about Fluent, the work you guys are doing. Right. So, thanks for the background before how you guys got into it. Maybe curious as to like, okay, when you were like with your buddies, you guys wanted to come up with an idea. Curious as to how that process was, how you came up with the idea of Fluent.
Yeah, so that's a great question. It's an interesting story in that I wasn't there to experience it. After our first startup failed, me and Yaniv, we were in Montreal at the time. This was like it was late 2018, early 2019. And at the time, our first startup failed. Long story short, we ran out of money before we found any significant product market fit. So, we couldn't raise, and we shut the company down. We had a lot of learnings from that, and it was really quite wonderful, but we ran out of all of our personal savings. So, like Yaniv decided to stay in Montreal and get a job because him, Gavin, and Olga, I'll give you background. For Fluent, we're four co-founders. There's me, there's Olga, she heads our design. There's Gavin, he's our CEO, and there's Yaniv, he heads our technology. He's our CTO. All of us have been good friends for many years. All of us have met each other in different ways 5, 6 years ago. Yaniv was, the first person I met out of this four squad, and we met in high school in films. And when our startup failed with the two of us, I decided to go back to Vancouver because I dropped out of school at the time. I had 1 year left in economics. So I was like, okay, well, I don't really have anything going on in my life right now. I'm out of savings, and my startup didn't work out. So I'll go back to mom's house and finish my degree. And Yaniv, at the time, wasn't in school. He had dropped out. He didn't want to go back, but he had a bunch of computer science experience and wanted to get a job in that as a software engineer. And it was quite tough because he had no formal experience. And in Quebec, in Montreal, he was having a tough time finding jobs. So, I mean, he was literally like working at call centers and like cleaning pools and like doing really hard manual labor, going back home, applying for jobs all night. And eventually, he got a really great position at Samsung, and stayed in Montreal. So the three of them stayed in Montreal. They lived in a house together, kind of came up with ideas and worked together in the evenings. And one evening, when all three of them were having post conversation after dinner, they're like, "Guys, we talk about ideas all the time. Why don't we just throw some bad ideas at the wall? Why don't we reverse it? What's the shittiest ideas that we can come up with?" So the first bad idea was, how about an ad subsidized delivery network? And you're like, oh, no, that doesn't sound too bad. And they're like, wait, no. How about if a guy comes to your house and with the pizza box, he opens it up and there's a mic, like a television screen on the top of the pizza box, and the ad is delivered to you in person. You sit there with the guy for 2 minutes and watch a Geico ad. And if you watch it, he gives you the pizza and the delivery fees wiped out. And they're like, oh yeah, no, we wouldn't want to live in that world. Shitty idea, bad, good, let's keep going. Second idea was, how about if we had a Chrome extension that just messed with your friends' screens? So like anytime they were like, hey, like I want to get a burger, it would just change burger to salad. Like just they're like, okay, that's bad, but that's not that bad. We're like, okay, well, how about if governments started using this to like, alter what their citizens saw on their screens, right? So it's like instead of the CNN article saying Joe Biden like messes up his infrastructure plan, it's like Joe Biden does an excellent job at his infrastructure plan. We're like, okay, this is nefarious. This is bad. And while we were going through that process, just threw shitty ideas at the wall. Some of us stop and Gavin stops and he's like, that idea that was terrible. But how about instead of swapping words to mess with the meaning of articles, how about if we swap the word in there in a different language? And he goes like, wait, why would we do that? And Gavin's like, oh shit, well maybe we could immerse you in a language while you reading in another one. Kind of like when you go to Paris and like you're walking around and you see a stop sign that says arrête and you're like, okay, that probably means stop. Now I just learned what stop means. Couldn't we do that on the internet? And everyone looked at each other, they're like, yeah, there's no reason we couldn't. So we're like, okay, so there might be a chance we might be able to teach you a new language on the internet by changing the languages that you read to different languages that you want to learn. And all of us were like, you know what, that's not a bad idea at all. That's fantastic. And interesting enough, that was the start of Fluent. That weekend, they looked for a way to test that idea out as quickly as possible. And they found that there was a hackathon happening in a university in Montreal called Concordia. It was one of the nice universities there. They applied. There was like 700 teams there. We were pretty late because we just saw this like a couple of days before the damn thing. Gavin goes downstairs to the Starbucks across the street and starts like interviewing like random CS students that he found on Craigslist. They start building out their plan for the weekend, and they go in this hackathon. Everyone no sleep, 18 Red Bulls, caffeinated, to the high, and our team comes in, and like we have a plan, we have like a roadmap for the weekend, we have an MVP laid out. Everyone sleeps. They come back the next morning rested with a coffee in their hand. Everyone else is tired, and we present. And to our surprise, man, out of 700 different teams, we ended up getting first place. And what was really interesting to us is after that, people just came up to our booth and was like, like I know this is just a hackathon, but if you make this product into something real I could use, I'd pay you right now. I need this. I'm in Montreal. I need to learn how to speak French. Give this to me. And we're like, okay, there's something here. Let's explore this. And so that was kind of the birth of Fluent.
Yeah, it's
And this
amazing.
was uh, this was February of 2020. So this is right as the pandemic was starting out, was us kind of diving into something new, and so that was kind of an interesting cross between two different uh, major world events in our lives.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. I love, complete with Red Bull, sleepless nights, the hackathon weekend. It's like such a great kind of founding story. And maybe give us a sense as to like and it's only been basically a year, an epidemic year, but what's been the progress so far? Like I've signed up, the tool is live. I've tested it. It's pretty neat. It works pretty well. But maybe give us a sense of the progress that you guys have made in the short amount of time.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And it's even shorter because like we started February, but we didn't go full time till July. Because like I said, none of us have personal savings. Like we had just gotten stable employment. We just got some money coming in to repair some of that savings debt. And then all of a sudden we're like, oh shit, like we got to do this, guy. We got to we got to jump on this. And we were like, well, we have no money. It's like, okay, well, let's work really hard and raise some money then, because we got to take this opportunity. This is big. Um, so since kind of we went full time in early summer of last year, what we've really been looking to do is focus, Nectar. We found in our last startups and with experience with other people and their stories that oftentimes how early stage startups fail is they try to boil the ocean. They try to build too much. They don't talk to their users enough, and they never really quite make it to the point of their product fitting what the market needs, right? And we felt this way in our last startup, so we really wanted to avoid this. So what we're doing since then is we really been focusing. We started with one language, which was French. And the reason we started there was because a lot of North Americans like to speak French as their second language. It's one of the most popular second languages spoken in the world. And in Montreal, obviously, it's super important because Montreal is a French speaking province, and a lot of English speakers come into the province and look for work. They need French. So we started there. What we've done is the progress is have been adding new languages very slowly, right? Because adding a language to Fluent is quite a difficult thing, and we'll talk about that later if like if we get into technology. So we started with French, then we added Spanish because Americans, like, right, that's a big market in America. And then now we're working on adding Italian as well. Italian's in beta, and we'll have that out in a few weeks. And we're going to add more and more languages this year. I think we'll add maybe 4 or 6 more languages this year.
It's interesting. And what's the rationale behind like swapping out words? Is there some kind of like research that proves that hey, this is an effective teaching method? So curious to hear you in terms of like how you're actually delivering your product.
Yeah, so that this style of learning, excuse me, it's called immersive learning, right? So in immersive learning, you're kind of learning by diving into something and being surrounded by it, right? The easiest example to paint is that if you go to France for a year, and you go there and you make a real effort to learn French, and you're picking up the road signs, and when you talk to your friends that you meet at cafes, they're all French, and you order with the barista, you're living and breathing the language, which is why it's so much easier to acquire a language when you go to a new city that speaks that language natively. um this style of learning, why it's so important to kind of like immerse people, is two parts. One part is that the way people currently learn second languages when they're not in a city, right? Like if I'm in Vancouver and I'm trying to learn Spanish, I have to use an app or a textbook or get a tutor, which means I'm only spending a very small sliver of my day in that language, right? And because I'm using an app or a textbook, right, I'm relying on another content source. So a lot of what I'm learning, a lot of the vocabulary, the phrases and stuff, isn't really relevant to my life. A lot of the people we interviewed about Duolingo, they said the product is nice, and they've done a wonderful job of gamifying it and making it simple and fun. But I'm learning, sentences like the cow ate green grass. Like, I live downtown. I don't need this. So immersing is interesting because it means whatever you're doing in your life, you're learning vocabulary suited to that. If I'm on Fluent and I'm a financier and all I care about is reading the Financial Times, the Wall Street journals, right, reading about stocks, that's the vocabulary that Fluent is going to serve to me. I'm going to learn what the Spanish word for stock is. I'm going to learn what the French word for market is. I'm going to learn terms like trading and maybe Dogecoin if there's a translation for that. Um, so the experience becomes a lot more relevant to your life, and because you're living in it, you get so much more exposure to the language. It becomes so much easier to build the habit of practicing every single day. Nobody in France has to remind themselves to practice when they go onto the street. The stop signs are in front of you. The people are speaking in front of you. You're hearing it without you needing to be disciplined. Same thing with Fluent. You don't need the discipline. You don't need the motivation, which is where a lot of language learning kind of fails. It's really difficult to stay motivated for months and months and never miss practice. But with Fluent, it's pretty damn easy. You turn the Fluent Chrome extension on, and every day we serve you a little bit more of that language.
Yeah, it seems like very apropos as a product, which means like because people want to also learn in bite-sized chunks, like you mentioned before, like tying it back to the initial conversation of like people, the attention span right now, like if you look at the average TikTok is like like 2.8 seconds or whatever. So it's like the way you do it, I find is very interesting because it's like in people's natural environment where they're browsing it and scanning the web. Maybe dive a little bit on the technical side. So I imagine I read a little bit that you guys are not using an external API. You're not plugging into like a Google Translate. So you're building everything your own. So curious to hear what are those, those big challenges you're facing. I imagine you have to have like multiple NLP engineers working kind of like around the clock. So just curious to hear you on like the technical side of the house.
So the technical side is super fascinating. It's really interesting. It's us taking all of the kind of cutting edge research in the field right now, all of these papers, a lot of them really kind of like hidden. We have to really search for them, and productizing this stuff, Frankstoning stuff together, open source systems, ideas of our own, ideas that we've taken from research papers, and building it out to build our translation engine. And the reason why we built a translation engine instead of going for a Google Translate API or something like that is for three different reasons. We need the engine to be fast, right? So if it works, offline, if it works as like on your laptop, then it's a lot faster. We don't have to ping a server somewhere else, get that stuff, and bring it back to you. Second, we respect your privacy more. There's less need for us to be sending the words that you see off to like Google servers and then bringing them back. If we're translating it right on your browser, we're privacy first by default, which is what we want to be. We really value privacy. We really value consumers' privacy. We're consumers in and of ourselves. We don't believe in ads. We don't believe in data mining. All that stuff is bullshit. We're a service. You like a service, we'll have Fluent Pro. You'll give us money, and we want to make the service as secure as possible. So being offline first kind of really helps with that. And third is that it's cost prohibitive to use Google Translate and these other APIs. It's really, really cheap if you're like one guy and you're translating a couple articles. But if you have thousands of users and every time they see a word, we have to translate the entire sentence because we need the context of the sentence to figure out what the word means. You can imagine how quickly, how many characters we see in a day. It's not in the hundreds, it's not in the thousands, it's in the millions and tens of millions that we're seeing. And so that becomes really cost prohibitive really, really quickly. So it's almost by necessity that we have to build this by ourselves. But as you know, necessity often drives improvement. With this, we get to be more privacy focused. We get to be faster for our users, right? And since we're cheaper, we get to pour all that money that we would have spent on servers on building Fluent itself to be better for our users.
It's a fascinating approach. Yeah, it's like you're taking the long way, but sometimes it's you're building a strong foundation to be able to go faster later on.
Yeah.
Um, what are your thoughts in terms of growth, next steps, funding? Like, what's your strategy to basically like take it 10, 100x from here?
So we're really lucky that the market really liked what we were doing, and we have some really, really incredible investors that believed in us from a very, very early stance. I mean, I'm talking like literally early last spring. Actually, is when we had people start to approach us, wondering if they could angel invest. And um, to be quite frank with you, as a Canadian, as somebody who is in this ecosystem that's just starting to develop in Canada now, we didn't know that if you had a product that was interesting enough that enough people were talking about that you could raise money off that even if you had no revenue and barely any users last year, right? But no, like American angel investors had a larger risk appetite than Canadian ones, and we were able to take advantage of that and form really cool relationships with some incredible people that took bets on us. And eventually, it was like, okay, well, we have enough interest here, let's raise a round. And we just finished a little while ago wrapping up a pre-seed round. It was quite interesting because it was one of those things that started out slow because the pandemic hit and it was really a slog to get any money because like the world was changing and nobody had any idea what the fuck was going on. And we had no networks because like we're Canadians, we're quite young. I'm 24. We're just at the very peak of our career, right? So we hadn't really built a strong network of investors. So we had to build all of that from the ground up. Um, but as we started moving and as we kept talking about what we're doing and building in public and using our network to find other people, uh, so many people kind of were interested and intrigued by what we were doing that we kind of oversubscribed our round that we just closed, and so we got more than what we were looking for, which is really incredible. Which means we get to pour a lot back into growth right now.
Yeah,
We've been really intentional with product building. At the stage we're at right now, we're at the point where we're just about to launch our pro or premium offering of Fluent. And so what that means is going to be really aggressive on growth and really aggressive on monetization to prove out that like, hey, people are willing to pay for this. Because people are. They tell us all the time, hey, let me pay for XYZ. Let me pay for XYZ. I'll give you money and give me this language. Now we have to see if people will actually put their dollars where their mouth is. So that's the point of where we're at right now. We're expanding the team slowly, carefully, thoughtfully, and we're really excited to push Fluent Pro out in just a few short weeks, and go really aggressive on the marketing behind that. Partner with different startups that are adjacent to what we do, so we can help like feed off their distribution and they can feed off ours, and then we can put money into different forms of organic and inorganic marketing as well.
yeah, very cool, man. Very cool. Well, look, best of luck, continued success, and obviously on the round. Maybe
Thank
just a
you.
curiosity question. Any interesting insights from the data that you guys have been able to pull so far with your users? Like, have we noticed that more and more people are looking at like X type of web page, like for translated words? So curious for any like unexpected insights when you looked at your users' behavior.
Yeah. So I just want to be clear when we talk about user behavior, we can like analyze user behavior just like every company does in terms of how they use the product, how much time they spend on the product, if they use a snooze feature, stuff like that. So we can have an idea of how to, like make Fluent better. But we don't do analysis on the types of articles that you're, reading. We don't look into like if you're, like banking on TD versus RBC. Like we are privacy first by default. We don't care about your porn history. Like we don't want to know, so we don't track it. Right? We're privacy first by default. I want to make that very clear. But in terms of the behavior of using Fluent, some really interesting things that we're seeing is that um, people use Fluent in unexpected ways. We thought originally that people would want to box Fluent into like their very like niche like recreational time or their leisure time and just kind of box it off there. But then we started like blocking sites that were primarily used for work, and our users would come up to us and they're like, "What are you doing?" We're like, "You're working. Do you want to see Fluent on?" They're like, "Hell yeah, yeah, please." We're like, "Okay, that's interesting." So people want Fluent on even when they're working, even when they're a remote knowledge worker. They're using Slack, they're using Discord to communicate. They're reading articles. They're a marketer. They're gathering data. They want to see it on during their day. So as we kind of dug deeper into like the psychology behind it, it was interesting in that if we were able to serve the right kind of words to you, we wouldn't place too much of a cognitive load on you. If we were able to assess the difficulty level of where you're at and serve you words that are kind of like challenging enough to push you forward, but not challenging enough to kind of like distract you, we could slot into any time that you're using the computer. And because your mind is just like kind of glancing over the sentence and using the context of the sentence to understand what that foreign word means, it's not that much of a cognitive load, which is really interesting, which means you can have Fluent almost on all of the time and be learning languages all of the time while you're working, while you're chatting with friends, while you're ordering Domino's, everything. It can really be this thing that lives across your entire life. So, Nectar, what that kind of enabled us to do was to think bigger about our vision of Fluent. Now, the way we see Fluent is we think about ourselves as a language learning operating system. We're not an app, we're not a place where you go to spend a couple minutes of your day. We want to be a place where you spend your entire digital day. If you're learning a language, we want to touch every part of it. If you're on Spotify, we have some ideas on how to make Spotify more interesting for language learners. Netflix, right? If you're learning like words, and then we show you on Netflix, like, hey, this TV show, like 30% of words that engage in this dialogue in this series. Watch this film, you'll understand most of it and you'll pick up the rest of it, right? We want to be a place where we touch everything, right? Because we've discovered that we can.
I
So that
love
was one
it.
of the most interesting things that we've learned recently.
I love the ambition, Ira. This is like amazing kind of ideas, and like I can't wait to see what you guys develop next. And yeah, I'd love to have you back for part two when you guys are like like raising like Series C probably. Um, yeah, the final question: Or could people find out, sign up if they want to play with it? What's the best way?
Yeah, so go to fluent.co, that's fluent.co, and you can go ahead and download a Chrome section from there. It takes about a minute to get set up. It's for free. It will be free for a very long time for everybody, forever, hopefully. And it will make money off a Pro package. And with the Pro, we will do some interesting things there. And I'm really excited to announce that. But if you want to try Fluent right now to learn French or Spanish, and we'll have an Italian on in a few short weeks, go to fluent.co. That's flunt.co. And follow us on Twitter as well. Our Twitter handle is usefluent. If you just type in Fluent on Twitter, you should be able to find us. If you don't, type use Fluent and go ahead and give us a follow. Thank you so much for having me on, man. This was a lot of fun. Thank you so much. And I hope to be back on for part two in in a very short period of time.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Merci, merci. Thank you so much, Ira. This is amazing.
Merci, Nectar. Take care. Thank you so much.